We all want to be loved. But what if, deep down, we've learned to survive by simply repeating what others want to hear? Like a parrot echoing words to stay close to its keeper, many of us shape our identity to please. This isn't just a habit, it's an emotional reflex. What drives this need for approval? And what can a bird teach us about ourselves? In this story, nature becomes a mirror for the human soul. From childhood, we're taught, sometimes without a single word, that love is earned. A smile when we say something cute. A frown when we speak too loud. A reward when we follow the rules. A cold silence when we don't. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, we begin to mold ourselves into what others seem to like. We become masters of adapting, bending, and reshaping our truth into something more palatable, more acceptable, more approved. The need for approval isn't a flaw, it's a survival mechanism. In the early days of our species, acceptance into a group meant protection, food, and safety. Rejection could mean death. That ancient wiring still pulses inside us. But in the modern world, we're no longer hunting in packs, we're scrolling through social feeds, navigating offices, and smiling through dinner tables filled with expectations. And yet, the fear of exclusion lingers. It whispers, don't upset them. Don't be too much. Just fit in. You see it everywhere. The employee who nods at every suggestion, even the bad ones, just to be liked. The friend who never speaks their mind for fear of losing their circle. The partner who swallows their feelings to keep the peace. And perhaps, most painfully, the person who can't even recognize their own desires anymore, because their life has become a series of echoes from other people's wishes. This need takes many forms. For some, it looks like perfectionism. Believing that being flawless is the only way to be accepted. For others, it's people-pleasing, saying yes when every fiber of their being screams no. Sometimes it's avoidance, retreating from confrontation because the thought of someone being displeased is unbearable. And sometimes, it's mimicry, adopting the beliefs, styles, even the speech patterns of those around them just to blend in. But where does this begin? Often, it starts in the home. Children learn quickly which behaviors bring approval and which bring rejection. A child who expresses anger and is punished might grow up to believe that anger makes them unlovable. A child who is praised only when they succeed may believe their worth depends on achievement. These early patterns become internal voices: be good. Be nice. Don't make waves. And the most dangerous of all, be who they want you to be. Society reinforces this conditioning. Schools reward the obedient. Workplaces praise the agreeable. Social media celebrates those who follow trends. It becomes easy to lose sight of who we are beneath all the applause. And when we do try to express something raw or real, we're met with confusion or rejection, and so we retreat again into the comfort of the role we've learned to play. This emotional state is exhausting. Constantly performing, constantly adapting, constantly fearing that a misstep could lead to being unloved or cast out. It leads to burnout, anxiety, and even depression. Because deep down, the person who's always trying to be what others want, doesn't know if anyone truly loves who they really are. The saddest irony is that in trying so hard to be loved, we sometimes lose the very thing that makes love meaningful: authenticity. But how can someone escape this invisible prison of approval seeking? How do we recognize when we're acting out of fear rather than truth? It begins with awareness. With noticing the moments we self-censor, when we smile through discomfort, when we mirror someone else's opinion even though we disagree. It begins with asking, am I doing this because it's true to me, or because I want them to like me? And perhaps most powerfully, it begins by understanding that this behavior, while common, is not a reflection of weakness, it's a reflection of an unmet emotional need. We all want to belong. But real belonging doesn't come from imitation. It comes from authenticity being welcomed, not hidden. And that's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Because in nature, there is a creature that embodies this emotional instinct with striking clarity: A creature that has survived not by being itself, but by copying those around it to secure safety, attention, and inclusion. A creature with feathers and bright eyes, who learned that the key to acceptance is to repeat what others want to hear. Are we really so different? In the dense canopies of tropical rainforests, a flash of green, blue, or scarlet darts between branches. Then comes the unmistakable sound, familiar words, perfectly repeated, echoing back not in understanding, but in mimicry. This is the parrot, a creature as vibrant in voice as it is in feather, and one whose behavior reveals a deep, metaphorical connection to the human need for approval. Parrots are among the most intelligent birds on Earth. Their ability to mimic human speech is not just a party trick, it is a powerful social tool. In the wild, parrots use complex vocalizations to bond with their flock, identify themselves, and maintain group cohesion. Their survival depends not on strength or stealth, but on belonging, staying within the social network of their group. They are constantly listening, constantly responding, constantly adjusting their calls to fit the social rhythm of those around them. This is the core of the parrot's instinct, adaptation through repetition. It hears, it echoes. It senses tone, and it mirrors. Not because it understands, but because it wants to connect. Its ability to mimic is its form of participation. In captivity, parrots mimic human voices for the same reason, they're trying to bond, to belong. They don't know the meaning of the words, but they know that mimicry draws attention, affection, and social reward. There's a haunting beauty to this. A parrot does not create its own song, it repeats the song it believes others want to hear. Its voice is not its own. It speaks in borrowed sounds, shaped by the expectations of those around it. The same way a person seeking approval might echo others' opinions, suppress their truth, or reflect the environment they believe will accept them. Parrots are also highly attuned to emotional tone. They may not understand the words, "I love you," but they recognize the warmth in the voice that speaks them. And they'll repeat that warmth, hoping to receive it again. Much like people who chase validation, not because they understand their worth, but because they long to feel it, again and again. In the wild, parrots thrive in tightly knit flocks. Being part of a flock offers safety, identity, and purpose. But the moment a parrot is isolated, its behavior changes. It may become anxious, destructive, or even silent. This mirrors what happens to humans when social belonging is threatened. We become emotionally distressed, dysregulated, and desperate to reconnect, often at the cost of our authenticity. And there's something else, parrots are masters of performance. They quickly learn which sounds make their caretakers laugh, which words earn praise, and which behaviors bring treats. They repeat what brings approval. They avoid what brings confusion. They adapt to the audience in front of them, crafting their expressions based on what will be accepted. Just like the employee who mirrors a manager's speech to appear more agreeable. Just like the child who acts well-behaved only when adults are watching. Just like the adult who curates every social media post for maximum approval. But here's the tragedy, despite all their mimicry, parrots rarely receive the kind of connection they truly crave. In captivity, many parrots suffer from loneliness, even if they're surrounded by humans. They may be loved for their performance, but rarely for their essence. They're caged, both literally and metaphorically, by the expectations of others. Does this sound familiar? How many people live this way, performing day after day, loved not for who they are, but for how well they fit a role? How many of us speak in borrowed words, echoing what the world wants to hear, just to feel accepted? The parrot is not just a bird. It is a mirror, showing us how deeply instinctual it is to repeat, to conform, to seek approval through imitation. Even the parrot's colors tell a story. Bright, bold, and eye-catching, these are not survival camouflage. These are signals. In the wild, color is a communication of identity, of status, of attraction. But just like with humans, that which is loudest on the outside often hides fragility on the inside. Beneath the dazzling plumage is a creature that depends entirely on connection, one that withers without it. Parrots also preen, constantly grooming their feathers not only for hygiene but to look presentable to their flock. It's an act of care, yes, but also of social signaling. They know that appearance affects inclusion. Sound familiar? And yet, the parrot isn't faking anything. It's simply doing what it knows. What evolution, instinct, and experience have taught it to do to survive and be loved. Just like people who seek approval aren't weak or deceptive. They are adaptive. They are trying to connect in the only way they know how, by becoming what they believe others want. The parrot's world is one of constant feedback: repeat what pleases, avoid what doesn't, stay in the flock, don't disrupt the harmony. And that is precisely how approval-seeking humans often live. We adjust, we repeat, we perform. Not because we are shallow, but because we are terrified of being alone, misunderstood, or unloved. In the next chapter, we will draw this connection directly. We will explore how the emotional survival mechanisms of the parrot are echoed in our human behaviors. You may begin to see your own habits through new eyes, not as flaws, but as echoes. Echoes of a deeper need. Echoes of the parrot. Imagine a young girl in a school hallway. Her laughter rises half a second after her classmates' jokes, her opinions always slightly aligned with the group's consensus. She nods too often, smiles too wide, and measures every word before she speaks. She isn't fake, she's trying to belong. And in her eyes, connection comes through mimicry. Like the parrot, she repeats what is rewarded. Like the parrot, she echoes to survive. The parallel is striking. The human who seeks approval. Whether a child in school, a professional in a meeting, or a partner in a relationship, shares the same emotional instinct as the parrot: repeat what pleases, suppress what risks rejection. It's not weakness. It's not dishonesty. It's adaptation. Just as the parrot learns which phrases make its human laugh, we learn which behaviors make people accept us, and we perform them, again and again. Parrots don't understand the words they repeat, but they understand the reaction. A cheer, a laugh, a clap. Approval. And so do we. A compliment, a like, a nod. Acceptance. That's the real currency. And we chase it instinctively, repeating the same jokes, opinions, and even identities that previously bought us inclusion. But here's the deeper truth: both human and parrot lose a little of themselves in the performance. The parrot that only mimics never sings its own song. And the person who only seeks to please rarely reveals their true thoughts. Over time, repetition replaces authenticity. We say what we're expected to say. We smile when we don't feel joy. We conform, not because it's easy, but because we fear what would happen if we didn't. This approval-seeking behavior begins early. As children, we're praised for being good, which often means quiet, obedient, agreeable. We learn quickly that to belong, we must please. That love is not unconditional, it is responsive to performance. So we adapt. We echo. And like the parrot in its cage, we practice our lines until they bring the desired reaction. And the stakes grow higher with age. In romantic relationships, we present curated versions of ourselves, afraid that being fully known might lead to rejection. At work, we conform to corporate culture, laugh at the boss's jokes, and stay silent when we disagree. On social media, we craft identities based on applause, not authenticity. We become fluent in echo. What makes this so powerful and so dangerous is that it often works. Just like the parrot earns attention with a perfect hello, the person who says what others want to hear is often rewarded: more friends, more followers, more perceived success. But beneath it all, a question grows: do they like me, or just the version I'm performing? The parrot, despite all its mimicry, cannot connect the way it longs to. It wants to be part of the flock, but it's mimicking humans who are not its own species. It repeats what pleases, but it's still alone. That's the heartbreak behind approval seeking. It may gain applause, but it rarely satisfies the deeper hunger for real connection. And here's where the metaphor deepens. When a parrot is finally placed among its own kind, it stops mimicking human speech and returns to its natural calls. It becomes itself again. Likewise, when a human feels truly safe, emotionally safe, they stop performing. They begin to speak honestly, to express needs, to set boundaries. They rediscover their voice. Yet, for many of us, that safety never arrives. So we stay in mimicry mode. In relationships, we become chameleons, adjusting to match our partners. In social groups, we downplay traits that might stand out. We silence opinions to avoid conflict. All of it comes from a single emotional equation: approval equals acceptance equals survival. This behavior is not irrational. It is rooted in biology. Humans, like parrots, are social creatures. Our brains are wired to interpret rejection as a threat. That's why disapproval hurts. It activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. It's why we rehearse conversations in our minds before saying them aloud. Why we analyze tone. Why we overthink texts. Like the parrot, we're always listening, adjusting, repeating. But the cost is high. We lose spontaneity. We lose self-trust. We become echoes in our own lives, unsure where the performance ends and the real self begins. The cage is invisible, but it's there, in every social rule we internalize, in every version of ourselves we create to please. Still, the instinct is not evil. It's human. It comes from a desire to be loved, to be seen, to be safe. The same way the parrot calls out in mimicry hoping someone will respond with affection, we shape ourselves in hopes of being accepted. The tragedy is not in the instinct. It's in the loneliness that often follows. So what can we learn from this? That to break the cycle, we must first recognize the pattern. To ask ourselves, am I speaking or echoing? Am I choosing or conforming? Am I connecting or performing? In the next chapter, we'll dive into the science behind these behaviors, how the brain, biology, and psychology converge to make approval seeking both inevitable and escapable. But for now, pause and reflect. How often do you mimic what brings reward? And how often do you silence what makes you, you? You are not alone in this. The parrot understands. Why do we crave approval so deeply that we begin to mirror others, repeating their ideas, behaviors, and even emotions? Why is it so hard to simply be ourselves? To understand the human need for approval, we must look into the wiring of the brain, the evolution of our species, and the shared biology between humans and animals, especially those, like parrots, who mimic to survive. From the very beginning of life, the human brain is designed for connection. Infants learn to read faces before they understand words. A baby who receives smiles and nurturing touch will develop stronger neural pathways associated with emotional security. Conversely, a baby exposed to inconsistent or negative feedback begins to develop hypervigilance, constantly scanning the environment for cues of approval or rejection. This is not just psychology, it's physiology. Our brains are sculpted by the social responses we receive. At the center of this system is the amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm system. It processes fear and threat, and for social beings like us, rejection feels like a threat. Studies using fMRI scans have shown that social exclusion activates the same parts of the brain as physical pain. This means that being ignored, dismissed, or criticized can literally hurt. That pain is not imagined, it's neurological. Enter the dopaminergic system, which governs pleasure and reward. Every time we receive praise, acceptance, or validation, whether in person or online, our brain releases dopamine, a chemical that makes us feel good. It's the same mechanism triggered by food, sex, or drugs. This creates a loop: seek approval, feel pleasure, repeat behavior. Over time, the brain learns that pleasing others equals safety and satisfaction. But here's where it gets even more interesting: mirror neurons, discovered in the 1990s, play a major role in how we absorb and reflect the behavior of those around us. These neurons fire both when we perform an action and when we observe someone else doing the same. They allow us to empathize, learn, and synchronize with others. It's why we yawn when someone else yawns. Why we feel awkward watching someone embarrass themselves. And yes, it's why we mimic speech patterns, gestures, and even emotional states of people we want to connect with. Parrots, remarkably, show similar neurological patterns. Their brains contain a region called the core song system, which functions much like our speech centers. In social parrots, this system becomes highly active when they hear familiar sounds or phrases, especially those that previously led to positive outcomes. This is vocal learning, a rare trait among animals. Parrots don't just repeat, they selectively repeat sounds that trigger rewarding responses. In essence, they're neurologically wired to seek approval through mimicry, just like us. So how does this play out in humans? In school, a child learns that certain behaviors, being quiet, agreeing with the teacher, not standing out, are praised. The brain logs these experiences and reinforces them with dopamine. In adulthood, this translates into workplace conformity, romantic suppression, and social anxiety. We don't consciously choose to seek approval. Our brains do it automatically. There's also the evolutionary aspect. Early human tribes depended on cohesion to survive. Being excluded from the group could mean death: no food, no shelter, no protection. Over thousands of years, natural selection favored individuals who adapted to group norms, avoided conflict, and mimicked behaviors that secured their place in the tribe. This ancient survival instinct still lives in us today. Our need to belong isn't vanity, it's legacy. Another scientific layer is attachment theory, pioneered by psychologist John Bowlby. It explains how early relationships with caregivers shape our adult behavior. People with secure attachment tend to express themselves freely and trust others. But those with anxious or avoidant attachment styles often struggle. The anxious individual, for instance, may become hyper-aware of others' reactions and shape their behavior to gain approval. They don't mimic because they're manipulative. They mimic because they fear abandonment. All of this brings us to a fundamental truth: the human brain is not designed for independence. It is designed for interdependence. Mimicry, repetition, and approval-seeking are not flaws, they're adaptations. But like any instinct, they can become maladaptive when they dominate our identity. When we become so attuned to others that we lose ourselves, the brain shifts into chronic stress. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision-making and self-regulation, becomes overwhelmed by the emotional centers of the brain. We lose clarity, authenticity, and confidence. And just like parrots in captivity can develop psychological distress from constant mimicry without real connection, humans too can suffer from emotional fatigue. The more we suppress our authentic selves to gain approval, the more likely we are to experience anxiety, depression, and a persistent sense of emptiness. But there is hope. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change, means that we can unlearn these patterns. When we begin to express ourselves honestly and experience safe acceptance, new neural pathways form. We become less reactive to disapproval. We develop resilience. And slowly, we replace mimicry with presence. Science doesn't tell us to reject our need for approval, it invites us to understand it. It shows us that we're not broken. We're just wired for connection in a world that often rewards performance over authenticity. And knowing this gives us the power to choose differently. Imagine Lisa. She's in a meeting at work, listening as her manager presents a flawed strategy. Deep down, she disagrees. She knows the numbers don't add up, that the team's efforts will be wasted. But when it's her turn to speak, she nods in agreement. Not because she believes in the plan, but because the manager smiled at her when she agreed last time. Her subconscious remembers that smile. Approval. safety, belonging. And so, she repeats what pleases, even when it silences her true voice. This is the mimicry of approval, the human version of a parrot's echoed phrase. It doesn't come from weakness, it comes from wiring. Lisa's desire to avoid conflict and maintain harmony is not just emotional, it's evolutionary. She doesn't know she's doing it. She only knows that speaking up feels dangerous, while agreeing feels warm. Now meet Daniel, a teenager navigating the unspoken social rules of high school. Around his parents, he's quiet and reserved. But at school, he morphs into whoever he needs to be. With the athletes, he brags about workouts. With the artists, he suddenly critiques modern sculpture. One afternoon, he catches himself repeating a joke someone else told just moments ago, word for word, and getting a laugh. It's accidental at first. But then he begins to do it deliberately, echoing what others say, because it wins him approval. Daniel doesn't want to be fake. He wants to belong. He doesn't yet realize that his identity is being shaped not by values, but by reactions. The louder the applause, the more he erases himself to earn it. There's also Mia, a mother who's always on high alert. She watches how her children respond to her tone, how her husband reacts to her opinions, how her friends mirror her body language. She prides herself on being easygoing and supportive, but secretly, she feels invisible. She often finishes other people's sentences, laughs a beat late to match their mood, and rewrites texts multiple times to make sure they sound agreeable. What Mia doesn't see is that she's living like a mirror, bending light, never emitting her own. Her story echoes the silent mimicry of a caged parrot, one that repeats words not from joy, but from the hope that someone will keep talking to it. Someone will notice. Then there's Kareem, an immigrant trying to fit into a new culture. Every day, he listens closely to how his colleagues speak, how they joke, how they complain. At first, he's just learning the language. But soon, he realizes he's also learning the rhythm of approval. When he nods at the right moments, they smile. When he repeats their slang, they include him in the next conversation. Kareem begins to perform, not just communicate. His instinct to adapt is noble, even brave. But it comes at a cost. Some nights, alone in his apartment, he speaks to himself in his native tongue, not just to remember, but to feel real. In each of these examples, Lisa, Daniel, Mia, Kareem, we see the same emotional choreography: listen, observe, echo, receive. Repeat. They're not copying others because they lack intelligence or personality. They're doing it because their emotional survival once depended on it. In childhood. In trauma. In transition. Somewhere along the line, being agreeable became safer than being authentic. This is where the parrot metaphor gains even more depth. A parrot in the wild mimics to bond. It repeats the calls of its flock to a firm connection. But in captivity, it mimics to avoid isolation. It hears the television, the human voice, the door creaking, and repeats them not out of comprehension, but out of yearning. It says, hello, not because it understands, but because, hello, once made someone smile. Just like us. Think about group chats or social media. You see someone post a popular opinion. You hesitate to disagree, even if you feel differently. Instead, you like the post. Maybe you repost it with a comment that echoes the original. You've joined the virtual flock. You mimic the tone of approval, even if it doesn't match your inner voice. We all do this, more often than we realize. Even in romantic relationships, mimicry can show up subtly. One partner laughs a certain way, and soon the other echoes it. One uses certain phrases, "you know what I mean," or "honestly," and the other picks it up too. This isn't deception. It's neurobiology. The desire to synchronize emotionally is rooted in empathy, but if left unchecked, it can become emotional camouflage. You look like you fit, but you've disappeared beneath the feathers. Real stories of approval mimicry are all around us. The woman who downplays her accomplishments to avoid seeming arrogant. The man who hides his grief because his friends expect him to be strong. The child who starts loving the same music as their classmates, even if they prefer something else. These are not lies. They are adaptations. But here's the question these stories raise: what happens when the mimicry stops working? When Lisa's agreement leads to failure? When Daniel's echo no longer earns laughs? When Mia's pleasantness still leaves her alone? When Karim's performance is appreciated, but not understood? That's when the illusion shatters. That's when the human, like the parrot, falls silent, because they're not heard for who they are, only for what they repeat. The danger of approval mimicry isn't that we become others. It's that we slowly forget ourselves. We become fluent in the language of others' expectations, but mute in the language of our own truth. And yet, these examples also reveal a profound hope: if mimicry is learned, authenticity can be relearned. If we can echo others, we can also remember our original voice. The key is awareness. And courage. And maybe, just maybe, a bit of silence, long enough to hear what we truly want to say. As we reach the end of this journey, it becomes clear that the desire for approval, like the parrot's mimicry, is deeply human. It isn't a flaw or weakness, it's a survival tool honed over millennia. Our brains are wired to connect, to belong, to be seen and heard. Yet, this need can mask our true selves, and the challenge lies not in eliminating it but in understanding and balancing it. Think about your own life. How often do you find yourself echoing words or ideas just to fit in? How often have you felt a flicker of relief after saying yes even when your heart said no? These moments are invitations to pause, to reflect, and to ask, am I living my truth, or the echo of someone else's voice? Understanding this is the first step toward reclaiming authenticity. When you recognize that mimicry serves a purpose, to protect, to connect, you can forgive yourself for it. You can see it as a chapter in your story, not the whole book. This awareness doesn't condemn but liberates. What if you could learn to distinguish when you are echoing for safety and when you are speaking from your own core? What if you could let the instinct for approval coexist with the courage to be authentic? This balance is the art of emotional intelligence, listening deeply to yourself while tuning into others, without losing your voice. In this light, the parrot becomes more than a mimic. It becomes a symbol of potential. Just as a parrot in the wild uses mimicry to belong but also has its unique song, you too can blend connection with individuality. Your approval-seeking instincts can be guides, not chains. Reflection invites change. It invites you to experiment with authenticity in small ways, saying no when it matters, sharing an unpopular opinion with kindness, pausing before echoing to ask, is this really me? These small acts of courage build a new habit. Being real in a world that often rewards conformity. But this journey isn't linear or simple. It's a dance between connection and self-expression, safety and risk, mimicry and voice. Some days you'll find yourself repeating patterns. Others, breaking free. Both are part of growth. You might wonder, can we ever fully shed the need for approval? The answer is no, and that's okay. Our social nature is a strength, not a weakness. The goal isn't to be perfectly independent but to be aware and intentional. To choose when to echo and when to sing solo. In this awareness lies power. Power to heal old wounds tied to rejection. Power to foster relationships rooted in honesty, not just harmony. Power to nurture a sense of belonging that doesn't cost you your identity. And so, as you close this exploration, carry this thought with you: your voice matters, not just because it echoes, but because it is uniquely yours. The world needs your authentic song, imperfect and evolving. What part of your voice have you been afraid to hear? What truths have you kept quiet for the sake of approval? Reflect on these questions, not to judge, but to invite discovery. The parrot's mimicry was once a mystery, now, it's a mirror. In its reflection, you see your own dance between belonging and being. This dance is not a problem to fix but a rhythm to embrace. May this understanding inspire you to listen more deeply to others and to yourself, to find harmony in authenticity, and to step boldly into the light of your own voice.